So we'll just start, or do you want to make?
Okay, let me see. Okay, I'll just say I'm looking forward to the discussions tonight, and also I'm going to focus on giving you feedback on the topic of your report. So even though people have been submitting their reading notes, I'm going to put off. I'm not going to do those first. I'm going to do the reports first, and I'll catch up with those next week.
Okay, so I guess I go first here. What I decided to do was on the role and the impact of organizational culture within the private sector. I'm really not looking at the private sector. I'm only really looking at IBM. So I mislabeled my name here, my paper. But I put together an abstract just to kind of make it sense to myself. And that is the purpose of my paper is to define and recognize the concept of organizational culture in terms of a dynamic model that demonstrates how culture is learned, passed on, and changed within an organization. Current academic and business literature is also investigating the role of organizational culture on a firm's economic value and its contribution to sustainable competitive advantage. That was really the emphasis that I wanted to do. I wanted to take the culture, but what's the so what? And so that's why I was looking at the sustainable competitive advantage. My motivation for this topic is I really did get interested from our course readings, and it helped me actually formulate a model of looking at culture, because in every book that we have different models or different perspectives, different frameworks. So I was getting kind of confused. So I did a compare and contrast with everything. It also was very active with business leaders and practitioners right now. You know, everybody's kind of talking about culture. Academically, I thought it was a really valid topic. Lots of key words: organization, culture, performance, leadership, competitive advantage, business model. So I wasn't shy on putting things together. I also liked the case study approach, and in most cases they were global companies: DEC, HP, CBGI, IBM, and they mentioned like 10 or 15 more. And then what really was interesting was that, you know, I worked for IBM for 20 years. And at the time, you know, we knew it was a culture, but we didn't know how much of a culture it was. And then over the years that I was there, from '83 to 2005, things went very different. You know, with the firing of the president, bringing in Gerstner, everything kind of changed. So that's why I was kind of motivated for this. My scope and approach of doing the product was to conduct academic and business research. And I was loaded with textbooks, periodicals, case studies, and everybody provided a lessons learned. So I wasn't shy on getting those things. I've already mentioned about the framework and the model. I think my next effort in this area would really be to develop my own model, probably like a best of breed from all the things that I found. You know, as I mentioned on the IBM, I was there for the good times, the bad times, the Gerstner times. It was a very competitive environment when I was there, and it was a lot of fun. We also wore a uniform. You know, it was the white shirts, the gray suits, dark pants, black, full suits, full long sleeve white shirt, button down. Every Christmas, my mother-in-law would give me 5 of them, so I was good. But there was also a lot of symbols around the offices. They all looked alike around the world. I had the opportunity to go to quite a few countries. They had think signs that were always there. They had in the lobby of all the IBM buildings would be, the 3 values, and my paper gets into all this thing. So you kind of knew when you were at an IBM site, much like the DEC examples that the textbooks covered. One of the things that I really wanted to focus on, though, was, does it matter? That was kind of, I put together a couple key questions. And is culture recognizable and identifiable? Is there really a sustainable competitive advantage? Some authors said yes, some said didn't matter. A lot of them had a hard time defining the economic consequences on what is sustainable competitive advantage. So that was always interesting. And then the last one, is it sustainable? You know, people say it is, but is it in the long run? And what's the long run? 5, 10 years, 20 years. In my case, when I left in 2005, everything turned at IBM. You wouldn't recognize it from when we were there. It used to always be in the best buildings in the downtown area. Now you can't even find an IBM office. So things really have changed quite a bit. And I get into it with my paper, because we used to have family days, we had Christmas parties. We rented out King's Dominion one year, just IBM. So, tuition reimbursement for education, all those things are gone now. I mean, it doesn't exist. And as I mentioned, I kind of stayed with the private, well, I did stay with the private sector because it got really unwieldy with nonprofits, associations, public. So once again, that's an area for future research. The key points of my paper, I focused on the theoretical foundations, which I also found enlightening because of the multiple schools of thoughts. All our authors that we covered had different perspectives, and I found at least another 4 or 5. I also liked that it was cross multiple academic disciplines, whether it was organizational behavior, leadership, economics. So it really broadened it. And then there was just unlimited models, frameworks, comparisons, benchmarks. So the point was that I wasn't shy for data. The problem is, how do you formulate it? And that's where I probably spend most of my time. And as I moved on from the theoretical foundations to the competitive advantage side of it, that's where I had to come up with my key questions so that I could once again define my research. The other thing was, which industries or organizations are positioned better, and they emphasized the the high-tech firms. And we'll get into reasons for that. And then we also, I was able to find about 10 or 15 different indicators, either from scorecards or dashboards, on how do you relate or identify sustainable performance in a cultural world. My conclusion was based on, they said it really works well if you have a high level of agreement on the process, much like the deck example, that people really understood what they were there to do. And also if there was a high level of intensity within the individuals within the organization. They also emphasized the fact that leadership is key, and if you have a stable leader, your culture lives longer, because at the lower end, when people coming and going, it really isn't impacting the organization because the thrust of everything is coming from the leadership. So in the case of IBM, things changed when they fired the president, which was never done in the history of the company, brought in somebody new who wasn't even from the company, another thing that was totally new to the organization. They also emphasized that everything revolves around strategy, which is another key word that I zeroed in on. And it's just not about symbols. I mean, it's more about what the symbols represent and the endearing of the symbols to the individuals, if they can really relate. And then I did a little research on, so if you have an organization and you don't like the current culture, how do you change it? And they said it's very, very difficult. And there was another probably 10 articles on the change of culture. If you change the culture, you're changing the game. So it's just a lot of different words that were available. So what did I learn? I learned that I like the topic, and it's a tremendous opportunity for future research. But once again, like, you have to zero in on, now I'll do the model next, then I might look at different organizations. I might go to the government or the federal sector. That's what we're going to do for one of my other classes. I'm going to try to piggyback on that. The other one that I already mentioned, that certain industries are key for it, but you would think of the high techs, the BMWs, the Volkswagens. I really found your introduction to last class very interesting, because that is going to have a tremendous impact, and they got rid of the leader. So now how's damage control going to be for Volkswagen? Is it going to affect the culture? Already mentioned about being too broad of a topic. You really do need to zero in. But you know, one thing that wasn't an issue was research material, and I spent too much time researching. You know, I probably should have just taken you know, I had piles of stuff. Okay, this is on leadership, this is on organizational culture, and I'm sitting there going through everything, and I was just wasting time because they're all very, very similar. But one takeaway was the issue is not the organizational culture, because that does vary according to the firm. And everybody can't settle on a general model. So that's why the point about having the 5 or 6 different models. But everybody agreed, though, that you need to have at least a model if you were going to measure the performance. So that will definitely help me on my next pursuit of this. My last slide just referenced all the major references that I actually used. You know, I could have gone 3 pages worth, but then I'd just be typing stuff that I didn't really use. So these are the key ones that I used. And Shine comes up time and time again. And he actually wrote a number of articles before this 3rd edition. And so he was probably referenced the most. Because one of the things I always do when I look at my references, I look at their references and kind of highlight who the key guys are and come up with the top 5. And then I make sure I read those articles. That just kind of helps me sort out things. I did read a couple of the books on Saving Big Blue about Lou Gerstner, just to make sure that I had everything right from what I remembered. And then there was a tremendous amount of academic literature in Sloan Review, McKinsey Review, that talked about this topic. So that's kind of where I went with my paper. And I'll be glad to share the paper once he reads it. He already told me he didn't like my title, but but so, you know, I don't want to. That's right. That's right. So, any other questions, comments?
So you researched or found about 5 or 6 models?
Different models. Like in the Shine book, he had a couple that he used, but I found very, very similar ones. And I tried to compare and contrast them. But you know, that would have been 5 pages right there if I printed it. So I think that is an opportunity for the next research activity.
Was there a model that resonated with you as if you were going to start an organization?
Well, what I did was I kind of defaulted to Shine just because of the bulk of the book that we read, and I liked his model the best. But they were very similar in nature. I didn't see many different or completely different ones at that level. But then the balanced scorecards and the dashboards were very, very different with different indicators based on culture. So the way they did their questions or where they zeroed in. So like, you know, the Shine book talks a lot about subcultures and all that. That was very, very helpful to me. That's why I kind of defaulted to him for this one. Okay, anything else? All right, thanks.
Writing since 1960. He's been around for, he's been organizational development guru for longest time.
Okay, anybody, who's next if you want to use this system, or
Anybody else using a PowerPoint?
we got it working?